It's the coldest morning of the year, and you're sitting behind the wheel turning the key, and all you hear is a click, then nothing. The dashboard flickers once and dies. You're already late, and now you're staring at a car that was running perfectly yesterday. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. The thing that just left you stranded is not a dead engine or a bad starter. It's a problem that a single dollar could have prevented, and German mechanics have known this for close to 100 years. I learned it the hard way, standing in a cold repair yard outside Stuttgart, watching an old man in a blue coat fix in 90 seconds what a dealership wanted to charge me hundreds for. His name was Klaus, and he laughed when I told him what the shop had quoted me. By the end of this, I'll show you exactly what he did, and I'll show you a tiny German trick, one you can trace back to workshop manuals from the 1930s that cost pennies and can add years to the most expensive part under your hood. It works on the car sitting in your driveway right now. No new tools, no specialist. So let me take you back to that morning, because I made the exact mistake you might be making today. I was living just outside Stuttgart in a little town called Göppingen, renting a room from a family that had owned the same house for 3 generations. My car was maybe 6 years old, nothing fancy. And one January morning it just refused to wake up. Click, 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 and silence. I did what most of us do. I panicked and I reached for my wallet. I called a tow, I called a shop, and I braced myself for a big bill. The young man at the counter told me I probably needed a new battery, maybe a new alternator, and that the wiring looked corroded. He said it so casually, like he was reading me the weather. But here's what stopped me cold. When I got home and told my landlord, an older gentleman who had worked his whole life in the machine trade, he didn't nod along. He frowned. He walked out to the car with me, popped the hood, and pointed at 2 little posts on top of the battery. They were covered in a crusty, pale blue and white powder that looked like something growing in a forgotten refrigerator. He said one word: corrosion. Now here's the number that changed how I think about cars forever. In Germany, there is an organization called the ADAC, the German Automobile Club, founded back in 1903. Every single year, they send out a fleet of yellow vans, thousands of them, to rescue stranded drivers, and every year they publish exactly what went wrong. It's called the Pannen Statistic, the breakdown statistics, and it is one of the most honest records of car trouble anywhere in the world. And do you know what sits at the very top of that list, year after year after year? Not the engine, not the transmission, the battery and its connections. In their reporting, battery-related faults have accounted for well over 40% of all breakdowns, sometimes closer to half. Let me say that again, because it's staggering. Nearly half of all the cars that die on the road in one of the most engineering-obsessed nations on earth die because of the battery and the little connections attached to it. And a huge share of those failures don't come from a bad battery at all. They come from that crusty powder my landlord pointed at. That corrosion acts like a wall between your battery and your car. The power is there, it just can't get through. So when that shop wanted to sell me a new battery, a new alternator, and new wiring, the truth was sitting right there on top of my perfectly good battery, and it could be wiped away for the cost of almost nothing. But at the time, I didn't understand why this simple thing was costing so many people so much money. That's when it started to make me angry. Because once I understood what corrosion really was, I had to ask the obvious question. If this is the #1 reason cars break down, and if it's this cheap to prevent, then why on earth does nobody tell you about it? Let me explain what's actually happening on top of that battery, because when you understand it, you'll never look at your car the same way again. Your battery is filled with acid. As it works, charging and discharging every time you drive, it releases tiny amounts of vapor and it gives off hydrogen gas. That vapor reacts with the metal of the terminals, the lead posts, and the clamps that grab onto them. Add a little moisture from the air, a little road salt in winter, and you get a chemical reaction. The metal begins to eat itself. That fluffy blue, white, and greenish powder is the metal literally corroding away. And here's the cruel part. That powder does not conduct electricity. So even though your battery might be perfectly healthy and fully charged, the current has to fight its way through a layer of crust to reach your car. The connection gets weaker and weaker. Your headlights dim, your starter groans, and one cold morning, when the battery has to work its hardest, the connection finally fails completely, and you get that click and that silence. Now, here is where I started getting suspicious, because this is not a mystery to the industry. Every mechanic on earth knows about terminal corrosion. Every battery maker knows about it. And yet the average driver, especially where I grew up, has never once been told to check it or protect against it. Think about who benefits from that silence. A battery that struggles through a layer of corrosion looks like a dying battery. It cranks slow, it fails in the cold. And what does a driver do when the battery seems weak? They buy a new one. A new battery might run you $150, $200, even $250 once you factor in the labor, and in many cases, the old battery was never the problem at all. The connection was. I saw this with my own eyes. That mechanic Klaus, the old man in the blue coat, told me he had lost count of the number of perfectly good batteries people brought him to replace. He'd test them, and they'd be fine. The real fix took him 2 minutes in a jar of something that cost less than a cup of coffee. But there's a deeper layer here, and it goes back decades. When cars were simpler and people did their own maintenance, this knowledge was common. Your father or your grandfather, if he tinkered with his own car, probably knew to keep the terminals clean and greased. It was in the owner's manuals. It was taught in the shop class at school. Then cars got complicated. Everything went under plastic covers. The message changed from take care of it yourself to leave it to the professionals and just replace things when they fail. A whole generation was quietly trained to stop looking under the hood. And the less you look, the more you pay. The Germans, though, never fully let go of the old habit. In a country where cars are inspected strictly and expected to last, where people keep a vehicle for 15 or 20 years, that kind of small, cheap, preventive care never went out of style. My landlord did it every autumn like clockwork, the same way he'd check the seals on the windows before winter. So the question became simple for me. What exactly was in that jar, and how do I use it? Because if half of all breakdowns trace back to this, then the fix for it is one of the most valuable things a driver can possibly know, and it turns out the answer goes back further than I ever imagined. The fix is grease, but not just any grease, and not used just any way, and the story of it is older than most of the cars on the road today. Let me take you back to Stuttgart again, because this region is holy ground for the automobile. It's the home of Robert Bosch, whose company, founded in 1886, more or less invented the modern electrical system for cars. Spark plugs, ignition, the whole nervous system of the engine. If anyone on earth understood the enemy of an electrical connection, it was the engineers in that part of Germany. And their enemy was always the same: moisture and air getting to bare metal. Once you keep those two things away from the connection, corrosion cannot begin. It's that simple. No air, no moisture, no rust, no crust. So German mechanics reached for the cheapest barrier known to man, a thin coating of grease over the terminals to seal them off from the world. In the old workshop manuals I've read about from the 1930s, mechanics were instructed to coat the battery posts with a film of acid-resistant grease or plain petroleum jelly to protect against what they called Sauerfraß, which translates roughly to acid eating. That word tells you everything. They saw the metal being eaten, and they sealed it shut. Here is exactly how it's done, and I want you to picture doing it this weekend, because it truly takes minutes. First, with the engine off, you look at your terminals. If you see that powdery buildup, you make a simple paste of baking soda and a little warm water. Baking soda neutralizes the acid. You brush it over the corrosion with an old toothbrush, and you'll actually see it fizz as it neutralizes the acid crust. Then you wipe it clean and let it dry. Then, And this is the part almost everyone gets wrong. You make sure the clamps are on tight, metal touching metal, a clean, solid connection. Only after that do you take a small amount of grease, petroleum jelly works, and you coat the outside of the terminals and the clamps in a thin protective film. You're building a raincoat over the whole connection so air and moisture can never get back in. That's it. A jar of petroleum jelly costs about $1 and lasts for years. Klaus did exactly this to my car in that cold yard, and my car that supposedly needed a new battery, a new alternator, and new wiring started on the first try. It ran for 3 more years on that same battery without a single problem. I stood there feeling like a fool. And that feeling, that quiet anger at having been kept in the dark, is exactly why I sat down and wrote everything I learned in those German yards into 3 books. What you are getting in this video is one fix, one failure point. In those pages, I walk you through the full set of 8 proven German driver protocols. No gadgets, no gimmicks, more than 390 pages of it, the same kind of small habits that cut a fuel bill and add 100,000 miles or more to the car already sitting in your driveway. Cold start rules for every winter morning. Tire pressure done by the numbers instead of by guessing. How to buy petrol the way a German does. How to read a failure long before it strands you. And how to use your own driving as maintenance. No imported parts, no special tools, no shop visit. If you want the whole system instead of one trick, scan the QR code right there on your screen. Use the link in the description or the pinned comment for the books. And believe me, I understand if you are still hesitating about touching that battery at all. I had been one phone call away from spending hundreds of dollars to fix a $1 problem. And the worst part was realizing how many other people were making that same mistake every single day, all because nobody ever showed them these 2 little posts under the hood. But maybe right now you're thinking this isn't for you. Maybe you're telling yourself you're not a car person, you don't own tools, you wouldn't know a terminal from a tailpipe, and you'd rather not go poking around a battery full of acid. I understand that completely, because that was me. I had never opened my own hood with any real purpose in my life. So this next part is built specifically for you, the person who feels like this belongs to mechanics and not to them. Because the truth is, you already own everything you need, and you don't have to touch anything dangerous to get most of the benefit. Here's the gentlest version, the one anyone can do. You do not need to remove a single cable. You do not need wrenches. The most important step is simply to look. Once a month, when your engine is cold and off, lift the hood and find the battery. It's usually a rectangular box with 2 posts on top, one marked with a plus and one with a minus. Just look at those posts. If they're clean and shiny, you're done. Close the hood. That look alone puts you ahead of most drivers on the road. If you see even a little of that colored powder starting, that's your early warning, months before it would ever leave you stranded. And you already have what you need to fight it. That box of baking soda in your kitchen cupboard, an old toothbrush you were about to throw away, a jar of petroleum jelly from the bathroom drawer, the same stuff people rub on chapped lips and dry hands. Every single one of those things is already in your house right now. For the timid, here's the simplest, safe routine. Keep the cables connected, don't unclamp anything. Just gently brush a little dry baking soda over any powder you see with the engine off, wipe it away with a dry rag, and then smear a thin film of petroleum jelly over the exposed metal of the posts and clamps with your finger or a cloth. Wear an old glove if you like. That coating alone, applied over connections that are already tight, dramatically slows the corrosion from ever coming back. And if you're truly not comfortable, here's the move that still saves you. The next time you take your car in for an oil change or a service, you say 7 words. Please clean and grease my battery terminals. It costs almost nothing. It takes them 2 minutes. And now they know that you know, which means they are far less likely to try to sell you a battery you don't need. That's the real power here. It isn't about becoming a mechanic. It's about no longer being helpless. The moment you understand what that powder is and what a dollar jar of grease does to it, you can never again be frightened into a big repair by a small problem. You've taken back a little piece of control over your own car and your own money. But I told you at the start there was one more thing, a tiny German trick, older than the cars on the road today, that goes one step beyond the grease. And this is the part that separates the people who just clean their terminals from the people whose batteries seem to last forever. This is the one I saved for you. When I finally understood the grease, I thought I knew everything. Then I noticed something odd about the German cars around me. When my landlord opened his hood and the hood of his neighbor's old Mercedes, I saw a small colored ring sitting around the base of each battery post, tucked underneath the clamp. One was red, one was often green or gray. They looked like little felt washers, soft rings of pressed wool. I asked what they were, and the answer sent me down a rabbit hole into old German maintenance practice that most people in the English-speaking world have simply never heard of. They're called Filzringe, felt rings, and specifically battery pole Filzringe, battery post felt rings. They're small discs of wool felt, and here's the clever part, they come soaked in a special oil, and in the classic versions, one ring is dyed red and one is dyed green so you'd fit the right one on the right post and never mix up your polarity. You slip the ring down over the post before you attach the clamp, so it sits right at the base where corrosion loves to start most. The felt does two things at once. The oil it's soaked in seeps up and coats the metal, sealing out air and moisture just like the grease. But the felt also acts like a little sponge and a barrier at the exact spot where acid vapor creeps out around the base of the post, the very place the grease on top can't fully protect. It's a second line of defense, sitting quietly at the root of the problem. These rings have been sold in German auto shops for generations. You can trace this style of protection back to the practice laid out in those early 20th century workshop practices around Sorafrost, the acid eating I mentioned, and the felt ring became the neat, standardized way German mechanics fought it. They cost mere pennies. A packet of them is one of the cheapest things you can buy for a car, and yet in decades of driving in some countries, most people have never once seen one or heard the word. That's the piece that stunned me. Here was a solution so cheap, so simple, and so effective that it had become standard practice in German garages, and it had almost completely skipped over an entire part of the world. Not because it stopped working, it works perfectly, but because somewhere along the way, the culture of caring for your own car quietly, cheaply, and by hand got replaced by the culture of just replace it when it dies. So here is the full secret, the thing you can do this weekend that puts you a century ahead. With the engine off and the negative cable disconnected first for safety, you clean the posts with your baking soda paste until the metal is bright. You slip a felt ring down over each post, right at the base. You reconnect the clamps good and tight, metal to metal, positive first when reconnecting, and then, only then, you smear your thin film of petroleum jelly over the top of the whole thing. Now you've got both layers. The felt ring guarding the root where the acid escapes, and the grease sealing the top from the weather. That is exactly how the old-timers in those Stuttgart workshops did it, and it's why their batteries so often outlived everyone's expectations by years. And remember the order, because this is the mistake that quietly ruins the whole thing. The grease goes on last, on the outside, after the connection is tight. Grease does not conduct electricity well, so it must never sit between the clamp and the post as an insulator. The metal makes the contact. The grease and the felt protect that contact from the air. Get that order right, and you've done what most professionals barely bother to do. I want you to think about what that means for a second. A packet of felt rings and a jar of jelly, together maybe $2 or $3, protecting the single most common failure point on your entire vehicle. The one thing that causes nearly half of all breakdowns in a nation famous for building the finest cars in the world, and it fits in the palm of your hand. That old man Klaus told me something in that cold yard that I've never forgotten. He said the most expensive repairs are almost always the ones you could have prevented for the price of a coffee. He'd seen it his whole life. People towed in, people frightened, people signing off on new parts, when the real trouble was a spoonful of powder they could have wiped away themselves. So the next time you turn your key on a cold morning and your car fires up strong and instant, I want you to remember those two little posts. Remember the felt ring at the base and the film of jelly on top. Remember that you are no longer the person who gets talked into a battery they don't need. You're the person who knows where the trouble really lives and how a single dollar keeps it away. What you just took back is bigger than a car repair. It's the quiet confidence of a person who understands their own machine. The same confidence my landlord had when he frowned at that powder and refused to believe a healthy battery was dead. That knowledge was never lost. It was just kept alive in old workshops and passed down by men in blue coats while the rest of us were being told to stop looking and start paying. If you're the kind of person who has always suspected that the simplest, most useful fixes get buried because there's no profit in a $1 solution, then you and I think exactly alike, and this channel was made for you. Now I want to hear from you. Go out to your car after this, lift the hood, and look at your battery terminals. Are they clean and bright, or do you see that blue and white powder starting to grow? Tell me in the comments what you found, and tell me whether anyone ever taught you to check this before today. I read them, and I want to know. Leave a comment, even one line. This audience is quieter than most, and it helps more than you know. And if you've got a son, a daughter, a friend, or a neighbor who drives an older car, send this to them, because this is the kind of thing that saves a real person real money on a real cold morning. If you believe, like I do, that a whole world of practical German know-how has been quietly buried under the words "just replace it," then come along with us, because we're digging it back up, one forgotten trick at a time. Next time, I'm going to show you the simple thing German drivers do to their windshield washer fluid in the cold that stops it from freezing and streaking, using something that costs almost nothing and probably sits in your cupboard right now. You'll want to know that one before the first hard frost, so I'll see you there. Before you go, one thing. Inside the old ways circle, I walk you through Klaus's full battery terminal method, step by step. And if your car does something you don't understand, you can ask me directly, and I answer you myself. No machine. You won't be alone in there. Thousands of practical folks like you already are. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime, one click. I'd love to have you with me. Now let me show you something even more valuable. There are a handful of simple German driving habits that can help your car last for years longer, saving you real money. That video's starting right here. Stay with me.